you aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Hello to the Missing Witches Coven. I'm so excited for this chat today with our guest, Kristen Sollée, who is an amazing witch author. Kristen, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, yes. I have written 3 books on the legacy of the witch in different forms: Witches, Sluts, Feminists, Catcall, and my new one is Witch Hunt, A Traveler's Guide to the Power and Persecution of the Witch. I also teach an undergraduate gender studies course for the past 6 years at the New School called The Legacy of the Witch. And it's introducing feminist concepts and talking about early modern witch hunting history and the witch archetype in popular culture, just a whole mishmash of things.
So let's go a little bit chronologically. Catcall is the one that I haven't read. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. That is kind of the relationship of the cat and the cat archetype with femininity throughout history, and the way cats have been disparaged or maligned because of their association with femininity, and tracing that all the way back to Aristotle. And there's the cats and the witch hunts, and the way cats have been used in politics, and sort of as a parallel in our language for women, catty, pussy, kittenish, all those things. So it's kind of a strange book. It's the least known. It's like my little sleeper, but I love it nevertheless.
Yeah, having read the second 2, I think definitely Catcall is next on my list for sure. I'm really excited to get into that. So some of the people that I know that are witches are like, I was born a witch. I always knew. And some people were like, I watched The Craft in high school, and that kind of got me thinking, which are you? Which witch are you?
So I grew up with a lot of things that I would call witchcraft now, and my mom is a witch, and so...
Hold on. I have to stop you there. Can you please tell us a little bit about your mom and what kind of witch she is?
Yeah, not an initiated tradition, but a clairvoyant and someone who, works with the natural world for manifestation and for her own healing and community healing, etc. And so... yeah, I feel like that was something I just thought of as stuff mom did or taught me about, like meditation and manifestation and what herbs to use for this or that, or and like how to write what I wanted and how to carry that around or bury it or do whatever with it to get what I was after. But I had a lot of Wiccan friends in high school. So I was like, oh, that's what witchcraft is. Cause that was the 90s and I just didn't know, And so that was never my path. I was never drawn to that, even though I love them. And so I was like, never really identify with that word until maybe my 20s, when I met a bunch of different practitioners in New York. And then they took me to witch shops. And then I was like, oh, it can be so many more things than, so I guess it's a weird question. I don't really have one answer, but I guess as far as using the term, it was much later in life. But as far as like the practice, I would say my whole life. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And the practices have changed. But...
oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So if you feel comfortable, can you describe some of the things? I mean, you're a writer, and I think we both find that is part of our practice.
Oh yes, absolutely, always. Mm-hmm.
But do you use tarot cards? Are you a diviner? Like what kind of things does your practice involve? Spiritual baths?
Like right now, not
right
like
in this.
Oh yeah,
yeah. These days.
Yeah. Not like terrible love spells, because that was a lot of the past. I don't do that anymore. Because they ended up, I got some rough outcomes, not knowing what I was doing. But that's, every witch will have an experience, or many like that. Bibliomancy and automatic writing, and that candle magic, a lot of sex magic. That's sort of my practice, I would say.
Can I stop you because I can sort of infer what it means, but I've never actually heard the word bibliomancy before.
Oh, yeah. It's just using books for divination.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, you put yourself in the place that you would, centering and cleansing yourself like you would before you read tarot for yourself or before you, do any sort of, spell work or ritual. And then, for me, sometimes it involves just like picking a book off the shelf and opening to a page and just sort of finding an answer in that page that I'm not expecting or even knowing what I'm looking for. And it sort of comes through.
For sure. Sometimes when I'm writing a Missing Witches episode, I'll get the biography of the witch. And before I start reading it, I'll just kind of open it to a random page. And it's sort of like, I feel like it's like that witch or that author, like telling me what is important through this, like, chance.
Absolutely. Yes, there it is. So, I mean, some people do it in a lot more codified fashion. I do it sometimes, on purpose, and sometimes it'll just happen because I'm always around books and touching books, and they just feel so like an extension of who I am and my thoughts. And even if they're not my books, I just feel like just all that, that energy that goes into creating a book, and the knowledge and the history of that knowledge that's part of most books out there. There's a lot of power in those pages, and I don't do it with digital, like Kindle stuff. I don't do that. I mean, I know it's like better for the environment in some ways, but it's not exactly a cut and dry thing. So I'm still old fashioned books or library books or whatever, but I still prefer the paper on my fingers.
Especially a library book, because it's been through so many hands.
Oh yeah. And just to even look when you get the kind that would have the stamps on the back, and you can even see like the dates it's been taken out. Like when you get a really old one, I love that.
Yeah. And I try to buy used books as often as I can. First, obviously for the environmental reason, but also because then you get whoever read it before you, like what they underlined, the little notes that they make in margins. Those are so thrilling to me.
Oh yeah, or when they dedicate it to someone weird in the front, and you're like, "What was that relationship?"
Mm-hmm. I ordered a second-hand copy of a book of essays. And when I opened it up, there was a 7 of diamonds inside.
Whoa.
And I looked it up at the time because I was like, okay, this means something. And I've forgotten what it meant. But like whatever the 7 of diamonds means in cartomancy is like, I was like, this is exactly correct.
Wait, so that's pentacles, right? Diamonds is pentacles? Like if you... transfer it over.
I think there is some translation between like a tarot deck and like a regular deck of playing cards.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Yeah. I haven't really found I found a pressed marijuana leaf inside a book. That was the only thing that was weird that I ever found.
That's magic for sure.
Yes, for sure.
So let's talk about witches, sluts, and feminists.
Sure.
The things and the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is something that we've seen so much, and you quote so many amazing witches. I want to go to one of your chapters here. One of my favorite chapters is Hex Cells.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, feminism, capitalism, and the witch, because this is something, again, like, and again, you talk about this a lot in the book, and particularly in this chapter. You go to Urban Outfitters and sort of like check out their witch merch.
Yeah.
And I think that this is something that the modern witch is, I don't know if struggling is the right word, but like something that we have to think about, because when we get our tools from ethical sources versus unethical sources, I think that, they're magical tools. So we have to believe that the energy with which they were created is sort of imbued within them, right?
Absolutely. It's super important.
Yeah. So when this like witch aesthetic becomes like mass produced in a non-ethical way, with exploitation of labor.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the products that we're buying and the witch that we are? It sounds like a rhetorical question, but I'm genuinely asking you, what does that mean for the witch that we are?
Yeah, and then also you have the layer of that, and it's usually there's some element of an appropriative practice, where they're appropriating some sort of closed practice in a lot of this, like, witchy merch sometimes, with like selling bundles of white sage at Urban Outfitters or whatever. So yeah, there's layer upon layer to think about. And, at the same time in that chapter, I talk about how some people, it is somewhat of a privilege to be able to have the knowledge to know how to avoid certain kinds of production cycles and know about like the abuses of capitalism and know about cultural appropriation. You know what I mean? So, that's its own thing. Like, where are people learning about that? Some people don't even know these concepts yet, I believe. I mean, more and more now, but, so yeah, there are going to always be people who come across Urban Outfitters as an example, perfect example. And maybe they are like, they buy a tarot deck. They're like, oh, this is weird. Or, like, I'm going to be a fortune teller, something like, at first glance to us, but then maybe they do begin to study and go deeper. And so I don't know, how wrong is that if they were totally unaware and then they, enter into the world of the occult and then educate themselves. So there's like, I try to think that that's the one good thing. But at the same time, the witch, I think, is particularly the witch archetype. If you follow like Silvia Federici, she sort of stands for this like world of female subjects that, capitalism had to do away with in order for, it to triumph. So
I have this page open and this
good.
line highlight. So I'll go ahead and read this for our listeners. Silvia Federici, obviously we here at Missing Witches are huge fans of hers as well. Silvia Federici argues the witch is, again, this is like triple highlight. There's like a little, anyway. The witch is the embodiment of a world of female subjects that capitalism had to destroy. So it does seem kind of counterintuitive if we think of the witch like that, as the witch also being this corporate entity.
Right. Like you can't buy and sell witchcraft. You can like sell the merch or the tools all day long, but what are those tools without the people who use them? And so, yeah, I think like, obviously you could get your tools from nature. You don't need to go to a store at all to be a practicing witch, So I know that's something many of us know, but I still think there's a lot of baby witches who are like, I have to buy everything,
Right. I mean, I always say like your index finger is the best magic wand that you will ever, and I think it was Gerald Gardner, was it? No, it was Scott Cunningham. Scott Cunningham said that like the rock that you find in the road is no different than like, the one you buy from the shop or whatever.
Yeah. And, I've been thinking about that with like crystals, for years, I didn't really know about the harmful practices of, mining for crystals that I know about now. And so I bought so many and now I'm like, no more. I'm not buying any more crystals. As much as I love to look at glittering things, it's like, you don't need any more. And a lot of it is unethical where it comes from. And there's a lot of exploitation in the countries that you're, stealing it from, basically, like ripping from the ground. Like, so I definitely agree with that rock in the road,
Yeah, I think Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. And that's definitely been my experience. I for sure, like, got my first rose quartz from eBay from some, unknown.
No shame. There's so many embarrassing, terrible things that I did and I didn't know. And I always seek to educate myself to be better and less of a gross person. So I'm hoping with that chapter, I really hope just like people would read it and hopefully think a little bit more about, what practices have to be in place for something to be produced ethically, like who's making it, like where are the raw materials coming from, what's the environmental impact, all that stuff. But again, it's also a privilege to have the time to go through all that and then the money to usually buy a more expensive thing, unless you're just getting it from the world around you,
Sure, picking it up from the ground.
From the ground, exactly. Yeah. It's complex.
It is very complex. And I think it kind of reminds me of this one story. I became friends with a mixed Indigenous woman, and she was doing circles, and she let me play her drum, and I just really felt really connected to the hand drum. Again, this line between appropriation and appreciation, I think a lot of it has to do with when you monetize.
Yes.
You know, so I did get myself a drum. I did not start teaching, you know, shamanistic drumming.
Totally.
I would never take money for it. But here's the thing, like I felt connected to this drum. So I went and I did my research and I got my drum from a Quebec indigenous company.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say Tribal Spirit Music. I'll put it in the show notes if I'm wrong. But Tribal Spirit Music. And again, all of their materials are ethically sourced and, you know, they do everything the old ways. And again, it's run by Indigenous people. So I felt good about it. You know, once again, I'm not going out and advertising like, here comes Amy the drummer. It's just in my personal practice. But one of my girlfriends, who was also in this circle with me, she got her drum from like a lady and it was pretty and, you know, she like saw the picture and it was like, ooh, like, and so she ordered it from this lady. And then like she had to hunt the woman down and chase her down. She didn't send it to her. When she finally sent it to her, it didn't come with a beater.
What?
You know? And so for me, I'm kind of like, well, that's what you get. and you know, I said that to my girlfriend. I was like, well, you know, like, because mine is imperfectly shaped. It's not a perfect circle. It's like, and they sent it to me literally like within days with like a beautiful note, you know, hoping that I'm And so I think that there's like its own reward when you have an ethical practice.
Yes, absolutely. And your money is going to support people that you support, you know, and want to support, etc. So yeah, absolutely. When it's possible, that is the goal.
So let's go back to this Silvia Federici quote. The embodiment of the world of female subjects that capitalism had to destroy. So we can think of tons of examples of this. The first one that pops into my mind is the nurse, the doctor, the medicine woman. So, you know, like the book Witches, Midwives, and Nurses.
Absolutely.
Is you know, my go-to for that. I recommend it all the time. But in your book, one of my favorite sort of this which had to be destroyed is the sexuality, a sexual woman.
Oh yeah, or the sacred whore, or all those.
Yes, I was going to say the sacred whore being one, and then you're talking about the Malefice Maleficarum, where all witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which is in women insatiable. So we have these contrary ideas where like women are bad because they're sexual, but then we have this flip side of like, well, women are prudes and it's our job to like protect ourselves from sex crazy men, you know, who will attack us if our skirt is too short.
Right. Well, that's the modern view. You know, back then, we're talking like 15th century, it was that women were closer to Satan and more likely to stray from that path and more likely to corrupt men.
So how do you think that dichotomy got flipped?
You know, that's a really interesting question. And I don't know the historiography of that. And I think it's just like a pick and choose, which viewpoint is easier to employ to control women or female sexualally, right? It's like one stopped working or one got overused. I don't know. They're like, okay, the witch hunts are over. We did that. Now let's pick something. I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I wish I had a more scholarly answer for you, but yeah, I find that fascinating too, but you know, there's still so much stigma against sexual women or sex workers, and like the connection between femininity and sexuality today, and the evil depravity of you know, sexual women. So that still persists too. But then there is that other side, like you said, that like women don't like sex and like it's men who are, you know, obviously these are just like total ridiculous caricatures.
Yeah. And like school girls can't wear tank tops.
Yes.
The flight of their shoulders makes men
right. The boys will stop studying and just like, you know, burn the school down.
Yeah. But this is one of the things I love about both of your books that I read, is that you have this like historical and contemporary viewpoints, and then you find ways to link them. Like you talk about the witch hunt, and then you talk about the Isla Vista shooter, and sort of like connect the things that he said before he went on his murder rampage to the witch hunts. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that specifically, or just like the connection between past and present?
Both.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, that I Love Is a Shooter was one of many examples of misogynistic extremists, you know, who like, or incels, you know, et cetera, who just bring up this idea of that the ownership of female bodies and of expecting female sexuality to be handed to you, and, you know, women as property and all that persists since the times of the witch hunts and long before that. So there's so many ways to connect these two time periods. And I know it's dangerous too. And I'm well aware that, like, I have friends who are strict historians that warn me, you know, against the dangers of making too many connections. But I still think it's really important and galvanizing for us in our current moment, dealing with the sexism and the misogyny and the patriarchal culture and the, you know, the transphobia and all that, to like look to the past sometimes.
Can you explain how it's dangerous? Because for me, like, making these patterns is all my brain wants to do.
Yeah, no, me too. I mean, from these strict historian perspectives, I've heard that, you know, they think each time comes so within its own context and cultural mores and folkways, and it's can be historically inaccurate, or it can you know, gloss over the lived experiences of people in both times by trying to say those times are exactly alike. You know, I get it, what they're saying, but I think it's important to obviously be as historically accurate as possible. But also, I think myth making or these connections are really important to you know, inspiring us in our political movements and in our daily lives. So it's like, which do you weight more? And I certainly weight the latter more, without sacrificing historicity as much as possible. But I get it that some historians are like, oh, it's so annoying when all these people try to twist the past to their aims, you know?
Right. Because all we have are sort of the secondhand.
Yeah, exactly.
Too, right? We weren't there.
No, and it's all distorted through the lens of the victors writing the histories. You know what I mean? So I get that that's true. And I've certainly read things, I saw them one way, and then I read deeper and was like, oh, wait, maybe it's this way. And so I get that you can totally like not get it right, quote unquote, but I'm never, you know, saying that like this is exactly the way the past happened, you know, it's recurring now exactly the same way. I'm saying there's things to draw from these you know, episodes in history that can inform us and inspire us today. And so I think there's nothing wrong with that, you know, so haters be damned.
That'll be the subtitle for this episode. Haters be damned. Hex the haters. Hex your haters. So let's talk about witch hunt. Oh my goodness. Okay. So like I had so many travel plans for 2020 that were canceled, obviously.
Me too. Yeah.
But reading your book, it really was like, witch hunt specifically, it really was like as bittersweet as it was, you know.
Yes,
it was like, because in the book you travel, you're not just writing about places, you are going to places. And so for me, reading the book was like going through these places myself, because your lens is this, I'm using scare quotes here, witch lens.
Yeah.
You know, to me, it really felt like the trip that I would take.
Oh, I'm so honored to hear that. That is like the best compliment ever.
So all the witches out there who are listening, I really, if your traveling bone is like aching and throbbing and vibrating, I really suggest like in lieu of traveling, you know, physically,
right.
Travel with Kristen through Europe, mostly Western Europe. It's like France, Germany, Italy, a lot of time in Italy. So let's start with one of my favorite sections, which was your tour of the Vatican.
Oh, yes. A Witch's Guide to the Vatican. I call the chapter.
Right. And that, I mean, that's precisely what it is. Obviously, we think of the Vatican as being this like holy place for Catholicism and Catholicism only.
Right.
But in your chapter, you talk about all the little hidden, and I don't want to spoil it, no spoilers for the people who are planning to read it, but can you maybe choose one of the pagan mysteries or, something that gave you like a very witch vibe that you found in the Vatican?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I've been a couple times, and I grew up with Catholic parents, although my mom's a Catholic, but moved on to other things, as I mentioned. But my dad was a Catholic and is a hardcore atheist because he hates Catholicism so much.
Mm-hmm.
It was always in my mind from childhood as like, Catholics are horrible and they killed everybody, and you know what I mean. And so I was never really thinking I would find anything witchy in the Vatican until I really started traveling there, like in my later 20s. And being like, sure, I'm curious, and then I realized, oh my God, there's so much incredible art there. And, you can see so many pre-Christian deities, like lioness goddess Sekhmet, and there's like Athena, and who else is in there? Aphrodite. And there's Joan of Arc and Catherine of Siena, but all these sort of like Christian witches, quote unquote, that, people in witchcraft communities, work with in their spiritual practice, or have been, allied with the witch archetype by contemporary practitioners because they're sort of groundbreaking women, or femmes. So, God, what is my favorite thing? I mean, there's so many like little moon and star, circular designs on the floor in the marble. And then like, there's a satyr in St. Peter's Basilica under the papal altar. There's like a satyr's face and like all kinds of little things. If you're looking, you'll see, you're like, this is really fucking pagan in here.
Vatican's so pagan.
Yeah. It's super witchy in there. And so when I started to see it that way, I was like, oh my God, this is the witchiest. Like, if you want to do witch travel, right, you have to go to the Vatican. Which just sounds absurd to say, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of, the witch tour, and I'm spacing out on the name. There's like, I think is it in Italy? There's like a town that has sigils like painted on all of the rooftops.
I don't know what city that is, but I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll figure it out and I'll put it in the show notes.
Awesome. I'd love to know.
Yeah. My sister traveled there and sent me about 1,000 pictures. She, by the way, her birthday is next month and she will be getting a copy of Witch Hunt for her birthday.
Awesome.
Yeah. Because she, unlike myself, has actually been to most of the places that you mentioned.
Oh, cool.
So I think she and I will have a very different experience. And for those of you listening at home, whether you're super well traveled like my sister is, or like moderately okay traveled like I am, I feel like you're really going to get something out of the book either way, whether you've been to these places or not.
Yeah, I hope so. I definitely wrote it with that intention,
Yeah, definitely. When we think of the witch tour, of Europe or Britain,
Mm-hmm.
Stonehenge and like
of course.
This. And so how important was it to you to include the Vatican in there from your personal like definition of what a witch is and what a witch does?
Well, I think a lot of people don't think of, let's say a lot of Americans don't think of Italy when you think of witch hunts.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly people are thinking of England, maybe Scotland, and then maybe Germany. I feel like those are the ones we know about. So I started in Italy because I wanted to link the history of how even witch hunting kind of started and the idea of, black magic, practiced by women. And it ties into the ancient world and ancient Rome and all that. So I had to dig back into, Italy's past. And so it's also the history of the Catholic Church is tied into this, and Christianity, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
even we don't have the term pagan until Christians come around. And then, everyone who's not Christian is sort of termed pagan as a, disparaging like term. So I think
in the West, we really love to label things. Huh?
Yes. Yeah. So I didn't start out saying, oh my God, the Vatican has to be in here. But the more I was, tracing the lineage of this figure we call the witch that then became part of this, horrible episode in history in the early modern era, I just realized that the Vatican was a big part of that. And people often still think it's only the Catholic Church that was involved in witch persecution or whatever, I think there's a lot of misinformation about that. So I really wanted to also include the Vatican to say, yeah, there, of course, the Inquisition and the Inquisitors started a lot of the witch persecution, but it wasn't exactly how we think it was. And, Protestants like really picked up the ball and ran with it. So there's not one group or religious sect to blame here.
Yeah. And I think ultimately as well, it really ties back into capitalism. Mm-hmm. Like my father's Hungarian, so I've done a little bit of research into the Hungarian folklore and so on. And one of the funniest stories that I read was that the witch hunts in Hungary, the witches that were killed also just happened to be like the richest landowners. Mm-hmm. So when those witches, quote unquote witches, were disposed of, then all of that land became, was turned over to someone else.
Sounds about right. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So we see this happening like in all different ways, how finances and witch hunting go hand in hand.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were so many cases I read about where it was so clear it was just a land grab or a cash grab by the local community accusing whomever of witchcraft,
Mm-hmm. And the eat the rich part of me is like, yeah,
right?
But then we see how easily this can be, turned around. And you talk about, so again, like one of my favorite things about your writing is this like past, present, future, play that you have.
I'm so glad.
I'm constantly like every time another witch that you name comes up that I haven't heard of, I've got like this list now of like a dozen potential subjects for the Missing Witches podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, my number one goal, is to like honor the victims of the witch hunts, but also to amplify the voices of these people that are often forgotten or, like not heard from anymore after their terrible deaths. So I feel like that's part of my job, part of why I'm here on, Earth right now. To sort of, think about these people and connect with their story, and share it if I can.
Yeah. And I think, that's what a lot of us are doing. We're just like doing the best we can to
you're doing it clearly.
But even, even those of us who don't write books or have podcasts, just by learning these people's stories, I feel that we're honoring them, whether we share them in public or not.
Absolutely. Even a moment of reading about them and thinking and imagining, they're alive still. Their memories are alive.
Yeah. It's like that old saying, like you die twice, like first when your body goes and then the last time someone says your name.
Oh, yes.
And so we are quite literally, based on that old saying, keeping these people alive.
Absolutely. And that's wonderful. If I perished that way, I would want people to keep me alive too.
So speaking of amplification, but in another sense, I definitely see you, and I'm going to guess you see yourself based on how you present yourself, as a rock and roll witch.
You're correct.
Can you talk to me about that like long-standing relationship between rock and roll and the occult?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that my occultic interests, besides like the practices I told you about that were kind of taught to me by my mom or I was around, like, but that wasn't like the occult, the history of the occult sciences and stuff. I learned all that shit when I was like listening to Led Zeppelin in like 6th grade. And I mean, I had much older brothers, like 20 years older. So I always liked super old, like 60s, 70s music and then 80s, but that's pretty much where I stopped. I was like, 90s and later, who cares? So like love classic rock. And, we have that like late 60s, 70s occult revival. And, bands like Coven, and I was Black Sabbath. And, I was watching some documentary on Led Zeppelin in 6th grade, and they were talking about Aleister Crowley and, Jimmy Page, like owning his house. And I was like, what is this? It just seems so mysterious and fascinating. And so that definitely, like a million other people, like sparked an interest. And I always wanted to be like a music journalist or just in bands. And like, that was my whole thing for like most of my 20s. And then finally I had this big shift later and then I, shifted what I was doing in my work. But like rock and roll is, I still think like my religion, like,
I can understand that for sure.
Yeah. I find it like a lot of the magical practices I do involve like devotionals with some sort of music, and it's usually heavy, like occult themed, you know, metal or classic rock or whatever. And I'm okay with that, even if that's like super cliche. Like, I feel like there's a lot of power and energy in music, and that's where I can like channel source and feel the magic of the world, like in those vibrations, like going to live shows. You know, I've done all kinds of stuff just to go around the world to see shows live, because it's just like, that is the holiest moment to me.
I was just talking to a girlfriend of mine the other day, and she is not a witch. She would laugh if you called her a witch. She's like super like, and I don't want to say that witches are not this, but she thinks that they are not this. She's very logical, and she doesn't see how you can be logical and a witch at the same time. Which again is like part of the work that I'm doing is you can be a logical witch. But we were talking about, you know, live shows, especially in the context of 2020, where we're missing them, and for us, where it is church, we're missing our church.
Yeah.
And she was saying, despite her very staunch, you know, anti-spiritualist atheism, she admits that, you know, certain shows have been the closest to religious experience that she has ever.
Absolutely. Like, I saw Iggy Pop when I was like 17, and he was like doing the crowd surfing, and like, it's never going to be the same as back in the day. Like, I wish I could go back in time and be there in the 70s and 80s, but I can't. So anyway, I'll take what I can get. But I still, you know, I definitely have seen so many shows where I felt like this, you know, this, it doesn't get better than this. And sometimes those feelings, that collective magic is more powerful than any spell work I've done with a coven, with myself, with anything.
Right.
Like, I have manifested stuff, but, you know, thinking of it during a show, like sort of meditating on things during shows. And it definitely came to fruition for me. So that is another kind of spellcraft that is so powerful, not even talked about that much, you know?
Yeah, well, this is what I was going to say, that I don't know if you're working on your fourth book right now, but I would like for your fourth book to be about this. And I will tell you exactly why.
Please do.
Again, one of the reasons that Risa and I started this project is because we were reading books and, you know, passing them back and forth and, you know, whatever, talking about what we had learned and what we had found. And there's this one book in particular called Season of the Witch. I believe
of course, I've read it. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you notice that there were no fucking women in it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just like...
Peter Biebergal is the author, and like, he's awesome, and I totally love that book, but I agree, there needs to be that one about the femininity that is so vital.
Even just like that includes, you know, because I was reading the book, and again, like, I was really enjoying learning about like Jimmy Page, like you were saying, and like living in Aleister Crowley, buying his house and all of that. But I kept expecting to find, because I know, like, for example, you know, Jim Morrison had that like witch wedding to that you know, woman. And so I think that oftentimes it was probably women who were bringing these ideas to Jim Morrison, to Jimmy Page, but they...
Oh, totally.
But who were they, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes, like, I love Pamela Des Barres and, like, the groupie culture and all that, and, like, those are, like, the witches of, you know, that's a fascinating... You know, you're saying this, and I'm like, maybe this does need to be my next book. I
really hope so. Like, if I could facilitate it anyway.
Wow. You know what? I'm just going to say, look, people want it. And by that people, I mean you. So I'm just going to...
Yeah, you tell your publishing house, listen, people have really been after me to do this, because that's the book that I want to read.
I want to read that too. And there's some books, like, you're right, but it's not the whole... like, story. And, you know, Jinx Dawson designed the sigil for my old website, Slutist. Like, I definitely wish there were more discussions of, like, the witch aspect of rock and roll. And I have that chapter in Witches Sluts Feminist, which is like the mini version of that book.
Exactly. And that's like, I need that expanded to 200, 300 pages.
Okay. Sure. You know what? Thank you for that input. You have inspired me today, so I appreciate it.
Okay. I have one more before I will let you go back to your inspiration in your next book. Writing your next book, start today.
Okay.
And because you did say, mention someone had designed a sigil for your website, and I can't remember which book it's in, but you You liken tattoos to protection sigils.
Yes, of course.
Can you talk about that for our tattooed or our non-tattooed listeners?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've designed sigils like for certain purposes and had them tattooed on me. So it's like you're, bringing it into being and on your skin, obviously. It's any charged symbol is certainly going to go deeper, literally, when you're tattooing it on yourself, right?
Mm.
And I feel like I know a lot of witches who get part of their practice is like sacred tattoos, or and part of the ritual of getting the tattoo, is a whole other thing that goes along with it. And especially like the artists, like I know multiple artists who are witches, tattoo artists who are witches, and then they sort of help midwife that process into being. So like they're conjuring that. They're channeling that.
You likening the tattooist to midwifery, or like the doula,
Yes.
the doula of protection, who's like walking you through this process. Because for sure it is. I mean, there's pain. There's
and
patience, patience and blood and a financial sacrifice that you have to make, presuming you're paying your tattoo artist. Oh my God, everyone pay your tattoo artist. tip your tattoo artist. But so you're making these sacrifices.
Yes.
So it really is like, I really think it is like a modern, and it's not modern. I mean, people have been doing like ancient. Very ancient ritualistic and again, to invoke power.
Yeah.
And so, to me, this is, I mean, some people are more flippant about it. Some people are like, oh, I just got it because it was pretty. And I have no problem with that if you just want to adorn yourself.
Oh, yeah. I have some tattoos that are just like, I don't know. I just like thought it looked cool. So I'm not like saying everything I have is like sacred by any means.
I think all of my tattoos are sacred. However, they're not all good.
Ooh, that's a good way to put it. I like that.
I think some of my shitty tattoos are some of my favorite ones.
Yes. As my old tattoo artist used to say, like, nobody likes someone with all perfect tattoos.
No. Because again, I think that like this, like, there's something dirty and gritty. Not dirty, my God. That was the wrong word. Please, everyone, clean needles, clean stations.
Yes.
I don't mean dirty, but dirty is the word. Gritty,
yes.
I guess.
Yeah.
About rock and roll, about getting tattoos. There's like I
mean, they were outlawed, there's an outlaw sort of like illegality or sort of like subversive, nature to all of that stuff.
Yeah. And so for me, like, it really is a spiritual practice getting tattooed for sure. And that's why I mean, I haven't had a walk-in since I was a teenager.
Yeah, me neither.
Like, I feel like, first of all, this is someone who's going to be like over my body for however many hours. So for just that reason alone, I need to be comfortable with them. But again, like when you're carrying someone's art around for the rest of your life, like I feel like that's such a major connection.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. I got one tattoo where the artist Marigold Santos, hi Goldie, she, and I hadn't really thought about it this way before, but she was like, thank you for carrying my art.
I love that.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, like that is amazing. Like I have an original Marigold Santos that's going to be on my body forever. And I think that that's beautiful.
That is really cool. I have like one tattoo that was designed by a friend and I'm always like, oh, I hope we stay good friends because that would be upsetting.
A great way to end a friendship supernaturally is to get matching tattoos. I found that this is just like...
You know what? I know people say that, but I have one friend and we have 3 matching tattoos and it's still going strong. So, I don't know.
Fingers crossed.
I believe in us. We're going to be together forever.
Yeah. One of my friends got a tattoo that said forever lucky. And as soon as he got it, I was like, if I got that tattoo, I would walk out of the shop and get hit by a car.
Oh my God.
No question in my mind.
That is so terrible and also funny.
Yeah. It's like, to me, you're just asking for trouble.
Yeah, I would not
yourself forever lucky.
Want that. Or like a relationship tattoo. Like I don't actually have any of those. Like that seems like a death knell to me.
My husband, before we were married, he tattooed my name on his chest.
Oh, okay. So it worked out.
it worked out, and it was like a beautiful gesture. He's not a heavily tattooed guy. I think that was like his second tattoo.
Wow. That's an even bigger deal. Wow.
But to me, like, and again, because I'm like a feminist, I think I had a little bit more of a problem with like branding myself with a man's name.
Totally.
So I like many of my tattoos are a tribute to our relationship in some way or another, but it's just not like his name.
The name. I totally get that. And I don't think I could have a name, anyone's name of any gender on me. I don't know. That feels like, I'm me. But symbols and all kinds of devotional things, I'm totally all for that.
Yeah, I also refused to change my name when we got married, so he knows. He's
clearly.
This is me. So again, I look very forward to your fourth book, Feminist.
I'm so glad you
Occultism.
decided it for me. And I gotta say, I look forward to your book. I pre-ordered it. So.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so, well, you know this. You're a book witch. It's like, it's terrifying and thrilling.
Yes.
So my next book purchase will be Catcall. And in the meantime, I highly suggest that our readers go out, and if you want to learn about specifically, feminism and sex magic and that kind of thing, start with Witches, Sluts, and Witches, Sluts, Feminists. I always try to put an and in there.
I know, me too.
And if you have that itchy travel and you can't travel, then like today, order yourself a copy of Witch Hunt and go traveling with Kristen. I really can't recommend it enough.
Oh, thank you so much. You're the best.
Thank you so much to you, the rock and roll witch. May you take your place on the forever altar of the rock and roll occult.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And hex the haters. Now, before I officially say goodbye to you, do you have what is your grand message to the world that you want to leave with the missing witches as your final parting thought?
I guess, the journey never ends. So... ...
Yeah,
I think that's what it is. This is an ongoing, I think everyone knows this who gets into the occult or witchcraft, but be ready for the ride of a lifetime.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Thank you so much.
What an awesome, I can't wait to meet you in person someday when we have our parties. You're living in New York?
Yes.
Okay, I'll call you as soon as I'm allowed to cross the border.
Awesome. I will be there for the hang.
Thank you so much. And once again, to the Missing Witches Coven, Kristen Sollée, that's Solle, accent aigu, E, and go and buy these books. They're fantastic. Bye, Kristen.
Bye. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
You must be a witch.
Don't forget to go to foxglovefarm.com and use offer code MissingWitches.